Hello there. Welcome to Kinitsuki Storytime. I am your host, Kinitsuki, and this evening we are going to be reading a book. Ain't that great? Now, this month's chapter is Inkheart. Yeah. Who's it by? It's by Cornelia Funk. Interesting. It's about 60-ish chapters. Yeah. Without much further ado, I think let's get started. Let's see here. Chapter 1. A Stranger in the Night. The moon shone in the rocking horse's eye, and in the mouse's eye too, when Tolly fetched it out from under his pillow to see. The clock went tick-tock, and in the stillness he thought he heard bare little feet running across the floor. Then laughter, and whispering, and it sounds like pages of a big book being turned over. Quote by Ellen Boston from The Children of Green Knowe. Rain fell that night, a fine, whispering rain. Many years later, Maggie had only to close her eyes, and she could still hear it, like tiny fingers tapping on the window pane. A dog barked, somewhere in the darkness, and however often she tossed and turned, Maggie couldn't get to sleep. The book she had been reading was under her pillow, pressing its cover against her ear as if to lure her back into its printed pages. "I'm sure it must be very comfortable, sleeping with a hard rectangular thing like that under your head," her father had teased the first time he found a book under her pillow. "Go on, admit it. The book whispers its story to you at night." "Sometimes, yes," Maggie had said, "but it only works for children," which made Mo tweak her nose. Mo. Maggie had never called her father anything else. That night, when so much began, and so many things changed forever, Maggie had one of her favorite books under her pillow, and since the rain wouldn't let her sleep, she sat up, rubbed the drowsiness from her eyes, and took it out. Its pages rustled promisingly when she opened it. Maggie thought this first whisper sounded a little different from one book to another, depending on whether or not she already knew the story it was going to tell her. But she needed light. She had a box of matches hidden in the drawer behind her of her bedside table. Mo had forbidden her to light candles at night. He didn't like fire. Fire devours books, he always said. But she was 12 years old, and surely she could be trusted to keep an eye on a couple of candle flames. Maggie loved to read by candlelight. She had 5 candlesticks on the windowsill, and she was just holding the lighted match to one of the black wicks when she heard footsteps outside. She blew out the match in alarm. Oh, how well she remembered it, even many years later, and knelt to look out the window, which was wet with rain. Then she saw him. The rain cast a kind of pallor on the darkness, and the stranger was little more than a shadow. Only his face gleamed white as he looked up at Maggie. His hair clung to his wet forehead. The rain was falling on him, but he ignored it. He stood there, motionless, arms crossed over his chest, as if it might at least warm him a little. And he kept staring at the house. "I must go and wake Mo," thought Maggie, but she stayed put, her heart thudding, and went on gazing into the night as if the stranger's silly stillness had infected her. Suddenly he turned his head, and Maggie felt as if he were looking straight into her eyes. She shot off the bed so fast that the open book fell to the floor, and she ran barefoot out into the dark corridor. This was the end of May, but it was chilly in the old house. There was still light on in Mo's room. He often stayed up reading late into the night. Maggie had inherited her love of books from her father. When she took refuge from a bad dream with him, nothing could lure her to sleep better than Mo's calming breathing beside her and the sound of the pages turning. Nothing chased nightmares away faster than the rustle of printed paper. But the figure outside the house was no dream. The book Mo was reading that night was bound in pale blue linen. Later, Maggie remembered that too. What unimportant little details stick out in the memory? "Mo, there's someone in the yard." Her father raised his head and looked at her with the usual absent expression he wore when she interrupted his reading. It always took him a few moments to find his way out of the other world, the labyrinth of printed letters. Someone out in the yard. Are you sure? Yes, he's staring at our house. Mo put down the book. So, what were you reading before you went to sleep? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Maggie frowned. Please, Mo, come and look. He didn't believe her, but he went anyways. Maggie tugged him along the corridor so impatiently that he stubbed a toe on a pile of books, which was hardly surprising. Stacks of books were piled up high all over the house, not just arranged in neat rows on bookshelves the way other people kept them. Oh no. The books in Mo's and Maggie's house were stacked under tables, on chairs, in the corners of rooms. There were books in the kitchen and books in the laboratory. Books on the TV set and in the closet. Small piles of books, tall piles of books, books thick and thin, books old and new. They welcomed Maggie down to breakfast with invitingly open pages. They kept boredom at bay and the weather was bad. And sometimes you fell over them. He's just standing there, whispered Maggie, lending Mo into her room. Has he got a hairy face? If so, he could be a werewolf. Oh, stop it. Meg looked at him sternly, although his jokes made her feel less scared. Already she hardly believed any more in the figure standing in the rain, until she knelt down again at the window. There, do you see him? She whispered. Mo looked out through the raindrops running down the pane and said nothing. Didn't you promise burglars would never break into our house because there's nothing here to steal? Whispered Maggie. He's not a burglar, replied Mo, but as he stepped back from the window, his face was so grave that Maggie's heart thudded faster than ever. Go back to bed, Maggie, he said. This visitor has come to see me. He left the room before Maggie could ask what kind of visitor, for goodness sake, turned up in the middle of the night. She followed him anxiously. As she crept down the corridor, he heard her father taking the chain off the front door, and when she reached the hall, she saw him standing in the open doorway. The night came in, dark and damp, and rushing of the rain sounded loud and deafening. Dustfinger, called Mo into the darkness. Is that you? Dustfinger? What kind of name was that? Maggie couldn't remember ever hearing it before, yet it sounded familiar, like a distant memory that wouldn't take shape properly. At first, all seemed still outside except for the rain falling, murmuring as if the night had found its voice. But then footsteps approached the house, and the man emerged from the darkness of the yard, his long coat so wet with rain that it clung to his legs. For a split second, as the stranger stepped into the light spilling out of the house, Maggie thought she saw a small furry head over his shoulder, snuffing as if it looked out of his backpack and then quickly disappeared back into it. Dustfinger wiped his wet face and his sleeve and offered Mo his hand. How are you, Silvertongue? He asked. It's been a long time. Hesitantly, Mo took the outstretched hand. A very long time, he said, looking past his visitor as if he expected to see another figure emerge from the night. Come in. You'll catch your death. Maggie says you've been standing out there for some time. Maggie? Ah, yes, of course. Dustfinger let Mo lead him into the house. He scrutinized Maggie so thoroughly she felt quite embarrassed and didn't know where to look. In the end, she just stared back. She's grown. You remember her, of course. Maggie noticed that Mo double-locked the door. How old is she now? Dustfinger smiled at her, and it was a strange smile. Maggie couldn't decide whether or not it was mocking, supercilious, or just awkward. She didn't smile back. 12, said Mo. 12! My word. Dustfinger pushed his dripping hair back from his forehead. It reached almost to his shoulders. Maggie wondered what color it was when it was dry. The stubble around his narrow-lipped mouth was gingery, like the fur of a stray cat. Maggie sometimes fed with a saucer of milk outside the door. Ginger hair sprouted on his cheeks, too, sparse as a boy's first beard, but not as long enough to hide the thick, long, pale scars. They made Dustfinger's face look as if it had been smashed and stuck back together again. 12, he repeated. Of course, she was, 3 then, wasn't she? Mo nodded. Come on, I'll find you some dry clothes. Impatiently, as if he were suddenly in a hurry to hide the man from Maggie, he led his visitor across the hall. And Maggie, he said, over his shoulder, you should go back to sleep. Then, without another word, he closed his workshop door. Maggie stood there, rubbing her cold feet together. Go back to sleep. Sometimes, when they'd stayed up late yet again, Mo would toss her down on his bed like a bag of walnuts. Sometimes he chased her around the house after supper until she escaped into her room, breathless with laughter. And sometimes he was so tired he lay down on the sofa and she made him a cup of coffee before she went to bed. But he had never, ever sent her off to her room so brusquely. A foreboding, clammy and fearful, came into her heart, as if, along with the visitor, whose name was so strange yet somehow so familiar, some menace had slipped into her life, and she wished, so hard that it frightened her, that she had never gone to get Mo, and Dustfinger had stayed outside until the rain had washed him away. When the door of the workshop opened again, she jumped. "Still there, I see," said Mo. "Go to bed. Maggie, please." He had that little frown over his nose that appeared only when something was really worrying him. He seemed to look straight through her, as if his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The foreboding in Maggie's heart grew, spreading black wings. "Send him away, Mo," she said, as he gently propelled her towards her room. "Please, send him away. I don't like him." Lo, Mo leaned in her open doorway. "He'll be gone when you get up in the morning." "Word of honor." "Word of honor, no crossed fingers?" Maggie looked at him straight in the eye. She could always tell when Mo was lying, however hard he tried to hide it from her. "No crossed fingers," he said, holding both hands out to show her. Then he closed her door, even though he knew she didn't like that. Maggie put her ear to it, listening. She could hear the clink of china, so the man with the sandy beard was getting a nice cup of tea to warm him up. "Hope he catches pneumonia," thought Maggie, though he needn't necessarily die of it. Maggie heard the kettle whistling in the kitchen and Mo carrying a tray of clattering crockery back to the workshop. When the door closed, she forced herself to wait a few more seconds, just to be on the safe side. She crept back out into the hallway. There was a sign hanging on the door of Mo's workshop, a small metal plaque. Maggie knew the words on it by heart. When she was 5, she had often practiced reading the old-fashioned, spindly lettering. Some books should be tasted, some devoured, but only a few should be chewed and digested thoroughly. Back then, when she still had to climb in a box to read the plaque, she had thought that chewing and digesting meant literally, and wondered, horribly, why Mo had hung this on his workshop door, the words of someone who vandalized books. Now, she knew what the plaque really meant, but tonight she wasn't interested in written words. Spoken words was what she wanted to hear, the words being exchanged in soft, almost inaudible whispers by the two men on the other side of the door. "Don't underestimate him," she heard Dustfinger said. His voice was so different from Mo's. No one else in the world had a voice quite like her father's. Mo could paint pictures in the empty air with his voice alone. He'd do anything to get a hold of it. That was Dustfinger again. And when I say anything, I can assure you I mean anything. I'll never let it have it. That was Mo. He'll still get his hands on it, one way or another, I'll tell you. They're on your trail. Wouldn't be the first time. I've always managed to shake them off before. "Oh yes? And for how much longer, do you think? What about your daughter? Are you telling me she actually likes moving around the whole time? Believe me, I know what I'm talking about." It was so quiet behind the door that Maggie scarcely dared breathe in case the two men heard her. Finally, her father spoke again, hesitantly, as if his tongue found it difficult to form the words. "What do you think I ought to do?" "Come with me. I'll take you to them." A cup clinked, the sound of a spoon against china. How loud small noises sound in silence. You know how much Capricorn thinks of your talents. He'd be glad if you took it to him of your own free will. I'm sure he would. The man he found to replace you is useless. Capricorn, another peculiar name. Dustfinger had uttered it as if the mere sound might scorch his tongue. Maggie wriggled her chilly toes and wrinkled her cold nose. She didn't understand much of what the two men were saying, but she tried to memorize every single word of it. It was quiet again in the workshop. "Oh, I don't know," he said to Mo at last. He sounded so weary that it tore at Maggie's heart. "I'll have to think about it. When do you think his men will get here?" "Soon." The word dropped, like a stone, into silence. "Soon," repeated Mo. "Very well. I'll have made up my mind by tomorrow. Do you have somewhere to sleep?" "Oh, I can always find a place," replied Dustfinger. "I'm managing quite well these days, although it's still all much too fast for me." His laugh was not a happy one. "But I'd like to know what you decide. May I come back tomorrow? About midday?" "Yes, of course. I'll be picking Maggie up from school at about 1:30. Come after that." Maggie heard a chair being pushed back and scurried back to her dorm. When the door of the workshop opened up, she was closing her bedroom door behind her. Pulling the covers up to her chin, she lay there listening as her father said goodbye to Dustfinger. "And thank you for the warning anyway," she heard him add as Dustfinger's footsteps moved away, slowly and uncertainly, as if he were reluctant to leave, as if he hadn't said anything he'd want to say. But at last he was gone, and only the rain kept drumming its wet fingers on Maggie's window. When Mo opened the door of her room, she quickly closed her eyes and tried to breathe slowly, as you do in a deep, innocent sleep. But Mo wasn't stupid. In fact, he was sometimes terribly clever. "Maggie, put one of your feet out of the bed," he told her. Reluctantly, she stuck her toes out from under the blanket and laid them in Mo's warm hand. They were still cold. "I knew it," he said. "You've been spying. Can't do as I tell you, just for once." Sighing, he tucked her foot back underneath the nice warm blankets. Then he sat down on her bed, passing his hands over his tired face, and looked out the window. His hair was dark as moleskin. Maggie had fair hair, like her mother, whom she knew only from a few faded photographs. "You should be glad you look more like her than me," Mo always said. "My head wouldn't look all good at all on a girl's neck." But Maggie wished she did look more like him. There wasn't a face in the world she loved more. "I didn't hear what you were saying anyways," she murmured. "Good." Mo stared out the window as if Dustfinger were still standing in the yard. And then he rose and went to the door. "Try to get some sleep," he said. But Maggie didn't want to sleep. "Dustfinger, what sort of name is that?" she asked. "And why does he call you Silvertongue?" Mo did not reply. "And this person who's looking for you? I heard Dustfinger called him Capricorn. Who is he?" "No one you want to meet." Her father didn't turn around. "I thought you didn't hear anything." "Good night, Maggie." And this time, he left her door open. The light from the hallway fell on her bed, mingling with the darkness of the night that seeped in through the window. And Maggie lay there, waiting for the dark to disappear, to take her fear of some evil menace away with it. Only later did she understand that evil had not appeared for the first time that night. It had just slunk back in again. Chapter 2. Secrets. "What do these children do without storybooks?" Netafali asked. And Reb Zublam replied, "They have to make do. Storybooks aren't bread. You can live without them." "I couldn't live without them," Netafali said. Isaac Breverish Singer, Nephali the storyteller, and his horse, Sus. It was early dawn when Maggie woke up. Night was fading over the fields as if rain had washed away the darkness out the hem of its garment. The alarm clock said just before 5, and Maggie was going to turn back over and go back to sleep when she suddenly sensed someone else in the room. Startled, she sat up and saw Mo standing by her open closet door. "Hello," he said, putting her favorite sweater in a suitcase. "I'm sorry. I know it's very early, but we have to leave. How about cocoa for breakfast?" Still drowsy with sleep, Maggie nodded. Outside, the birds were twittering loudly, as if they'd been awake for hours. Mo put two more pairs of jeans in her suitcase, closed it, and carried it to the door. "Wear something warm," he said. "It's chilly outside." "Where are we going?" asked Maggie, but he had already disappeared. She looked out of the window, feeling confused. She almost expected to see Dustfinger, but there was only a blackbird in the yard, hopping over the stones, which were wet after the rain. Maggie put on her jeans and stumbled into the kitchen. 2 suitcases, a traveling bag, and Mo's toolbox stood out in the hall. Her father was sitting at the kitchen table making sandwiches for the journey. When she came into the kitchen, he looked briefly and smiled at her, but Maggie could see he was worried about something. "Mo, we can't go away now," she said. "The school holidays don't start for another week." "Well, it won't be the first time I've had to go away on business during the school term." He was right about that. In fact, he went away quite often. Whenever an antique dealer, a book collector, or a library needed a bookbinder and commissioned Mo to restore a few valuable old books, freeing them of dust and mold, or dressing them in new clothes, as he put it. Maggie didn't think the word bookbinder described Mo's work particularly well, and a few months ago she had made him a sign to hang on his workshop saying, "Mortimer Floor Chart, Book Doctor." And the book doctor never called on his patients without taking his daughter, too. They had always done that, and they always would, and never mind what Maggie's teachers said. "How about chickenpox? Have I used that excuse already?" Yes, last time, when we had to go see that dreary man with the Bibles." Maggie scrutinized her father's face. "Mo, is it because of last night that we have to leave?" For a moment, she thought he was going to tell her everything, whatever there was to tell, but he shook his head. No, of course not, he said, putting the sandwiches he had made into a plastic bag. Your mother has an aunt called Eleanor. We visited her once when you were very small. She's been wanting me to come and put her books in order for a long time. She lives beside a lake in the north of Italy. I always forget which lake, but it's a lovely place, a day's drive away. He did not look at her as he spoke. Maggie wanted to ask, but why do we have to go now? But she didn't. Nor did she ask if he had forgotten that he was meeting someone at midday. She was too afraid of the answers, and she didn't want Mo to lie to her again. Is this aunt as peculiar as the others? Was all she said. Mo had already taken her visit various relations. Both he and Maggie's mother had large families whose homes, so far as Maggie could see, were scattered all over half of Europe. Mo smiled. Yes, she is a bit peculiar, but you'll get along with her all right. She has some really wonderful books. So how long are we going to be away? It could be quite some time. Maggie sipped on her cocoa. It was so hot she burned her lips and had to quickly press the cold blade of the knife to her mouth. Mo pushed his hair chair back. I have to pack a few more things from the workshop, he said. It won't take long. You must be very tired, but you can sleep once we're in the van. Pardon me. Maggie just nodded and looked out the nearby kitchen window. It was a gray morning. Mist drifted over the fields at the foot of the nearby hills, and Maggie felt as if shadows of the night were still hiding among the trees. Pack up the food. Take plenty to read, Mo called from the hall, as if she didn't always. Years ago, he had made her a box to hold her favorite books on all their journeys, short and long, near and far. It's a good idea to have your own books with you in a strange place, Mo always said. He himself took at least a dozen. Mo had painted the box poppy red. Poppies were Maggie's favorite flower. They pressed well between the pages of a book, and you could stamp a star-shaped pattern on your skin with their pepper pot seed capsules. He decorated the box and painted Maggie's treasure chest in lovely curly lettering on the lid. The box was lined with shiny black taffeta, but you could hardly see any of the fabric because Maggie had a great many favorite books, and she always added another whenever they traveled anywhere. If you take a book with you on a journey, Mo had said when he first put one in the box, an odd thing happens. The book begins collecting your memories, and forever after you only have to open that book and be back where you first read it. It will all come into your mind with the very first words, the sights you saw in that place and what it smelled like, the ice cream you ate while you were reading it. Yes, books are like flypaper. Memories cling to the printed page better than anywhere else. He was probably right, but there was another reason why Maggie took her books whenever they went away. They were her home when she was somewhere strange. They were familiar voices, friends that never quarreled with her, clever, powerful friends, daring and knowledgeable, tried and tested adventurers who had traveled far and wide. Her books cheered her up when she was sad and kept her from being bored, while Mo cut leather and fabric to the right size and restitched old pages over that countless years had grown fragile from many fingers leafing through them. Some of her books always went away with Maggie. Others were left at home because they weren't right for her, or where she was going, or to make room for a new, unknown story she hadn't yet read. Maggie stroked their curved spines. Which books should she take this time? Which stories would help drive away the fear that had crept into the house late last night? I know, thought Maggie. Why not a story about telling lies? Mo told lies. He told terrible lies, even though he knew that every time he told one, she looked hard at his nose. Pinocchio, thought Maggie. No, too sinister, and too sad. But she wanted something exciting, a story to drive all other thoughts out of her head, even the darkest. The witches, yeah, she'd take the bald-headed witches who turned children into mice, and the Odyssey, with the Cyclops and the Enchantress who transforms his warriors into pigs. Her journey could hardly be more dangerous than his, could it? On the left-hand side of the box, there was two picture books that Maggie had used when she was teaching herself to read. 5 years old she'd been, and you could still see where her tiny forefinger had moved over the pages. And right at the bottom, hidden under all the others, were the books Maggie had made herself. She'd spent days sticking them together and cutting up the paper. She had painted picture after picture, and Mo had to write what they were underneath them. An angel with a happy face from Maggie for Mo. She'd written her name herself, although back then she always left the E off the end. Maggie looked at the clumsy lettering and put the little book back in the box. Mo had helped her with the binding, of course. He had bound all of her homemade books in brightly patterned paper, and he had given her a stamp for the others so she could print her name and the head of a unicorn on the title page, sometimes in black ink and sometimes in red, depending on how she felt. But Mo had never read aloud to her from her books. Not once. He had tossed Maggie up in the air. He had carried her around the house with her on his shoulders. He had taught her how to make a bookmark out of a blackbird's feathers, but he had never read aloud to her. Not once, not a single word, however often she put books in his lap. Maggie just had to teach herself how to decipher the black marks and open the treasure chest. She straightened up. There was still a little room in the box. Perhaps Mo had a new book she could take. An especially big, fat, wonderful book. The door to his workshop was closed. Mo, Maggie pressed the handle down. The long table where he worked had been swept clean, not with a stamp nor a knife in sight. Mo had packed everything. Had he been lying after all? Maggie went into the workshop and looked around. The door to the treasury was open. The treasury was really just a storage room, but Maggie had given the little cubbyhole that name because it was where her father stored the most precious materials. The finest leather, the most beautiful fabrics, marbled paper, stamps to print patterns in gold on soft leather. Maggie put her head around the open door and saw Mo covering a book with brown paper. It was not a particularly large book, and not especially fat. The green linen binding looked worn, but that was all Maggie could see, because Mo quickly hid the book behind his back as soon as he noticed her. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. I. For a moment, Maggie was speechless with shock. Mo's face was so dark. "I only wanted to ask if you had a new book for me. I've read all the ones in my room, and Mo passed his hand over his face. "Yes, of course. I'm sure we can find something," he said, but his eyes were still saying, go away, Maggie," and the brown paper crinkled behind his back. "I'll be with you in a moment," he said. "I have a few more things to pack, okay?" A little later, he brought her 3 books, but the one he had been covering with brown paper wasn't one of them. An hour later, they were taking everything out into the yard. Maggie shivered as she stepped outdoors. It was a chilly morning after the night's rain, and the sun hung in the sky like a pale coin lost by somebody high up in the clouds. They had been living in an old farmhouse for just under a year. Maggie liked the view of the surrounding hills, the swallows' nests under the roof, the dried-up well that yawned darkly as if it went straight down to the earth's core. The house itself had always been too big and drafty for her liking, with all those empty rooms full of fat spiders, but the rent was low, and Mo had enough space for his books and for his workshop. There was a hen house outside, and the barn, which now only housed their old camper van. It would have been perfect for a couple of cows. Or a horse. "Cows have to be milked, Maggie," Mo said, when she suggested keeping a couple. "Very, very early in the morning. Every day." "What about a horse?" she had asked. "Even P.B. Longstocking has a horse, and she doesn't have a stable." She'd been happy with a few chickens or a goat, but they too had to be fed every day, and she and Mo went away too often for that. So Maggie had the only ginger cat, who sometimes came visiting when it couldn't be bothered to compete with the dogs on the farm next door. The grumpy old farmer who lives there was their only neighbor. Sometimes his dogs howled so pitifully that Maggie put her hands over her ears. It was 20 minutes by bike to the nearest village, where she went to school and where 2 of her friends lived, but Mo usually took her in the van because it was a long, lonely ride along a narrow road that wound past nothing but fields of dark trees. "What on earth have you packed in here? Bricks?" asked Mo as he carried Maggie's book box out of the house. "You're the one who says books have to be heavy because the whole world's inside them," said Maggie, making him laugh for the first time that morning. The camper van, standing in the abandoned barn like a solid multicolored animal, was more familiar to Maggie than any of the houses where she and Mo had lived. She never slept more deeply and more soundly than in a bed he had made to sit in for her. There was a table too, of course, a kitchen tucked into a corner and a bench to sit on. When you lifted the seat of the bench, there were travel guides, road maps, and well-worn paperbacks under it. Yes, Maggie was fond of the van, but this morning she hesitated to get in. When Mo finally went back to the house to lock the door, she suddenly felt like they would never come back here, and that this journey was going to be different than any other, and they would drive farther and farther away, in flight from something that had no name, or at least none that Mo was able to tell her. "Very well, off we go south," he said. as he got behind the steering wheel, and so they set off, without saying goodbye to anyone, on a morning that still seemed much too early and smelled of rain. But Dustfinger was waiting for them at the gate. Chapter 3. You know what? We'll take a brief intermission here. Welcome back, everybody. Chapter 3. Going South. Behind the wild woods comes the wild world, said the rat, and that's something that doesn't matter, either to you or to me. I've never been there, and I'm never going. Nor you either, if you've got any sense at all. A quote by Kenneth Gramman, The Wind of the Willows. Dustfinger must have been waiting in the road beyond the wall. Maggie had picked up her precarious way along the top of the wall hundreds of times, up to the rusted hinges of the gate and back again, eyes tightly closed so that she could get a clear view of the tiger she'd imagined waiting in the bamboo at the foot of the wall. His eyes, yellow as amber, were foaming rapids to her right and to her left. Only Dustfinger was there now, but no other sight could have made Maggie's heart beat faster. He appeared so suddenly that Mo almost ran him down. He wore only a sweater, and he was shivering, with his arms folded over his chest. His coat was probably still damp from last night's rain, but his hair was dry now, a ruffled, sandy mop above his scarred face. Mo swore under his breath, switched off the engine, and got out of the van. Smiling his strange smile, Dustfinger leaned back against the wall. "Where are you going in such a hurry, Silvertongue? Didn't we have a date?" he asked. "You stood me up like this once before, remember?" "You know why I'm in a hurry," replied Mo. "For the same reason as last time." He was still standing by the open door of the van, looking tense, as if he couldn't wait for Dustfinger to get out of the way. But Dustfinger pretended not to notice Mo's impatience. "Then may I know where you're going?" he inquired. "It took me 4 years to find you last time, and if luck hadn't been on your side, Capricorn's men would have got to you first." When he glanced at Maggie, she stared back, icily. Mo was silent for a while. "Capricorn is in the north," he answered at last, "so we're going south. Or is he taking up residence somewhere else now?" Dustfinger looked down the road. Last night's rain shone in the potholes. No, he said. "No, he's still in the north. Or so I hear. And since you've absolutely made up your mind to go on refusing him what he wants, I'd better go south myself as fast as I can. Heaven knows I don't want to be the one to give Capricorn's men the bad news. So, if you'd give me a lift part of the way, I'm ready to leave." The two bags he picked up from where they stood by the wall looked as if they'd been around the world a dozen times. Apart from the bags, Dustfinger had nothing but a backpack with him. Maggie compressed her lips. "No, Mo," she thought. "No, let's not take him." But she only had to look at her father to know his answer would be different. "Come on, Silvertongue," said Dustfinger. "What am I going to tell Capricorn's men if I fall into their hands?" He looked lost, standing there like a stray dog. As hard as Maggie tried to see something sinister about him, she couldn't. Not in the pale morning light. All the same, she didn't want him to go with them. Her face showed that very clearly, but neither of the two men took any notice of her. "Believe me, I couldn't keep the fact that I'd seen you from them for very long," Dustfinger continued. "And anyways," he hesitated before completing his sentence, "you still owe me, don't you?" Mo bowed his head. Maggie saw his hand closing more firmly around the open door of the minivan. "If you want to look at it like that," he said, "I suppose I do still owe you." The relief was plain to see on Dustfinger's scarred face. He quickly hoisted his backpack over his shoulders, and came over to the van with his bags. "Wait a minute," cried Maggie, as Mo moved to help him. "If he's coming with us, then I want to know why we're running away. Who is this man called Capricorn?" Mo turned to her. "Maggie," he began in the tune she knew only too well. "Maggie, don't be so silly," it meant. "Come along now, Maggie." She opened the van door and jumped out. "Maggie, for heaven's sake, get back in. We have to leave." "I'm not getting back in until you tell me." Mo came towards her, but Maggie slipped away and ran through the gate into the road. "Why won't you tell me?" she cried. The road was deserted, as if there was no other human beings in the world. A slight breeze had risen, caressing Maggie's face and rustling in the leaves of the lime tree that grew up by the roadside. The sky was still wan, and the gray refused to clear. "I want to know what's going on," cried Maggie. "I want to know why we had to get up at 5 o'clock, and why I don't have to go to school. I want to know if we're ever coming back, and I want to know who this Capricorn is." When she spoke the name, Mo looked around as if the man with the strange name, the man he and Dustfinger obviously feared so much, might step out of the empty barn, just as suddenly as Dustfinger had emerged from behind the wall. The yard was empty, and Maggie was too furious to feel frightened of someone that she knew rather nothing about him other than his name. "You've always told me everything," she shouted at her father. "Always." But Mo was still silent. "Everyone has a few secrets, Maggie," he said at last. "Now come along, do get in. We have to leave." Dustfinger looked first at Mo, and then at Maggie with an expression of incredulity on his face. "You haven't told her?" Maggie heard him ask in a low voice. Mo shook his head. "But you have to tell her something. It's dangerous for her not to know. She's not a baby anymore." "It's dangerous for her to know, too," said Mo, "and it wouldn't change anything." Maggie was still standing in the road. I heard all of that, she cried. What's dangerous? I'm not getting in until you tell me. Mo still said nothing. Dustfinger looked at him, uncertain for a moment, and then put down his bags. Very well. Then I'll tell her about Capricorn myself. He came slowly towards Maggie, who involuntarily stepped back. You met him once, said Dustfinger. It's a long time ago, and you won't remember. You were so little. He held his hand at knee height in the air. How do I explain what he's like? If you were to see a cat eating a young bird, I expect you'd cry, wouldn't you? Or try to help the bird. Capricorn would feed the bird to the cat on purpose, just to watch it being torn apart, and the little creature screeching and struggling would be as sweet as honey to him. Maggie took another step backward, but Dustfinger kept advancing towards her. I don't suppose you get any fun from terrifying people until the knees were so weak that you could hardly stand, he asked. Nothing gives Capricorn more pleasure. And I don't suppose you think you can just help yourself to anything that you want, never mind what or where. Capricorn does. Unfortunately, your father has something Capricorn has his heart set on. Maggie glanced at Mo, but he just stood there, looking at her. Capricorn can't bind books like your father, Dustfinger went on. In fact, he's not much good at anything except terrifying people, but he's a master of that art. It's his whole life. I doubt he himself has any idea what it's like to be so paralyzed by fear. He feels so small and insignificant. But he knows how to arouse that fear and to spread it in people's homes and their beds, in their hearts and in their heads. His men spread fear abroad. Like the Black Death, they push it under doors and through mailboxes. They paint it on walls and stable doors until it infects everything around it of its own accord, silent and stinking like a plague. Dustfinger was very close to Maggie now. Capricorn has many men, he said softly. Most have been with him since they were children, and if Capricorn were to order one of them to cut off your nose or one of your ears, he'd do it without batting an eyelash. They like to dress in black, like crows. Only their leader wears a small white shirt under his black jacket. And should you ever meet any of them, make yourself small, very small, and hope they don't notice you. Understand? Maggie nodded. Her heart was pounding so hard she could scarcely breathe. I can see why your father has never told you about Capricorn, said Dustfinger, looking at Mo. If I had children, I'd rather tell them about nice people too. I know the world's not just full of nice people. Maggie couldn't help her voice from shaking with anger and more than a touch of fear. Oh, yes. How do you know that? There it was again, that mysterious, sad, and supercilious smile at the same time. Have you ever had anything to do with the real villain? I've read about them. Dustfinger laughed aloud. Yes, of course, it always comes to the same thing, he said. His mockery hurt, like stinging nettles. He bent down to Maggie and looked her in the face. All the same, I hope reading about them is as close as you ever get, he said quietly. Mo was stowing Dustfinger's bags in the back of the van. I hope there's nothing in there that might come flying about our heads, he said, as Dustfinger got in the back seat behind Maggie. With your trade, I wouldn't be surprised. Before Maggie could ask what trade it was, Dustfinger opened his backpack and carefully lifted out an animal. It was blinking, sleepily. Since we obviously have quite a long journey ahead of us, he told Mo, I'd like to introduce someone to your daughter. The creature was almost half the size of a rabbit, but much tinier, with a bushy tail now draped over Dustfinger's chest like a fur collar. It dug its slender claws into his sleeve while inspecting Maggie with its gleamy, beady black eyes. And when it yawned, it bared teeth as sharp as needles. This is Gwyn, said Dustfinger. You can tickle him beyond the ears if you like. He's very sleepy at the moment, so he won't bite. Does he usually? Asked Maggie. Yes, said Mo, getting back behind the wheel. If I were you, I'd keep my fingers away from that little brute. Maggie couldn't keep her hands off of any animal, however sharp its teeth. He's a marten or something like that, right? She asked. Something of that nature. Dustfinger put his hands in his pockets and gave Gwyn a piece of dry bread. Maggie stroked its tiny little head as he chewed, and her fingertips found something hard under the silky fur, tiny horns growing behind his ears. Surprised, she took her hand away. Do martens have horns? Dustfinger winked at her and let Gwyn climb into the backpack. This one does, he said. Bewildered, Maggie watched him fasten the straps. She felt as if she were still touching Gwyn's little horns. Mo, did you know that martens have horns? She asked. Dustfinger stuck on that sharp-toothed little devil of his for his performances. What kind of performances? Maggie looked inquiringly. First at Mo, then at Dustfinger. Mo just started the engine, and Dustfinger, who seemed to have come far, judging by his bags, took off his boots and stretched out on Mo's bed in the van with a deep sigh. Don't give me away, Silvertongue, he said before he closed his eyes. I have my own secrets, you know, and for those, I need darkness. They must have driven 50 kilometers, and Maggie was still trying to figure out what he possibly could have meant. Mo, she asked, when Dustfinger began snoring behind them, what does Capricorn want from you? She lowered her voice before she spoke the name, as if it might remove some of the menace from it. A book, replied Mo, without taking his eyes off the road. A book? Then why not give it to him? I can't. I'll explain soon, but not now, all right? Maggie looked out at the van window. The world they were passing outside already looked so unfamiliar. Unfamiliar houses, unfamiliar roads, unfamiliar fields. Even the trees and the sky looked unfamiliar. But Maggie was used to that. She never really felt at home anywhere. Mo was her home. Mo and her books, and perhaps the camper van that carried them from one place to the next. This aunt that we're going to see, she said, as they drove through an endless tunnel. Does she have any children? No, said Mo. I'm afraid she doesn't particularly like children either. But as I said, I'm sure you'll get along well with her. Maggie sighed. She could remember several aunts, and she hadn't gotten along particularly well with any of them. They were driving through the mountains now. The slopes on both sides of the road rose ever more steeply, and there came a point where the houses looked not just unfamiliar, but really different. Maggie tried to pass the time by counting tunnels, but when the night swallowed them up and the darkness went on, she fell asleep. She dreamed of Martins and blackjackets and a book and a brown paper cover. Chapter 4. A House Full of Books. There is a sort of busy worm that will the fairest book deform. Their tasteless tooth will tear and taint the poet, the patriot, sage, or saint, nor sparring wit nor learning. Now, if you'd know the reason why, the best of reasons I'll supply. 'Tis bread to the poor vermin. J. Draston, quoted by W. Blades. Maggie woke up. Because it was so quiet, the regular sound of the engine that had lulled her to sleep had stopped. The car's seat beside her was empty. It took Maggie a little while to remember why she wasn't in her bed at home. Tiny dead flies were stuck to the windshield, and the van was parked outside an iron gate. It looked alarming, with sharp ashen gray spikes, a gate made of spearheads just waiting to impale anyone who tried to clamber over. It reminded Maggie of one of her favorite stories, the tale of the selfish giant who wouldn't let children into his garden. That was exactly how she had imagined his garden gate. Mo was standing in the road with Dustfinger. Maggie got out and went over to them. On the right of the road, a densely wooded slope fell deeply to the bank of a wide lake. The hills on the other side of the lake rose like giants, emerging from the depths. The water was almost black, pale twilight, darkly reflected in the waves, are already spreading across the sky. The first lights were coming on in the houses on the bank, looking like the glowworms or falling stars. A lovely place, isn't it? Mo put his arm around Maggie's shoulder. I know you like stories about robbers. You see that ruined castle? A notorious robber band once lived there. I must ask Eleanor about them. She knows everything about this lake. Maggie just nodded and rested her head against his shoulder. She was so tired she felt quite dizzy, but for the first time since they had set off Mo's face, wasn't looking grim with anxiety. Where does she live then? Asked Maggie, stifling a yawn. Not behind that spiky gate. Actually, yes. This is the entrance to her property. Not very inviting, is it? Mo laughed and led Maggie across the road. Eleanor is very proud of this gate. She had it specially made. It's copied from a picture in a book. The picture of the selfish giant's garden? Murmured Maggie, peering through the intricately twinning iron bars. The selfish giant, Mo laughed. No, I think it was another story, although that one would suit Eleanor pretty well. Tall hedges grew on both sides of the gate, their thorny branches hiding any view of what lay beyond. But even through the iron bars, Maggie could see nothing promising except for tall rhododendron bushes and a broad gravel drive that soon disappeared between them. Looks like you have rich relatives, Dustfinger whispered in her ear. Yes, Eleanor is quite rich, said Mo, drawing Maggie away from the gate. but she'll probably end up as poor as a church mouse because she spends so much money on books. I think she'd sell her soul to the devil without thinking twice if he offered her the right book for it. He pushed the heavy gate open with a single movement. "What are you doing?" asked Maggie in alarm. "We can't just drive in." For there was a sign beside the door, still clearly legible, even if some of the letters were partly hidden by the leaves of the hedge. "Private property. No unauthorized entry." Maggie didn't think it sounded very inviting. Mo, however, only laughed. "Don't worry," he said, opening the gate wider. "The only thing Eleanor guards with the burglar alarm is her library. She couldn't care less about who walks through this gate. She's not what you'd call a nervous woman. She doesn't have very many visitors anyways." "What about dogs?" Dustfinger peered anxiously into the strange garden. "The gate suggested at least 3 ferocious dogs to me, big ones the size of calves." But Mo just shook his head. "Eleanor hates dogs," he said, going back to the van. "Okay, get in." Eleanor's grounds were more like a wood than a garden. Once they were through the gateway, the drive curved as if taking a deep breath before going on up the slope, then lost itself among dark firs and chestnut trees, which grew so close together that their branches made a tunnel. Maggie was just thinking it would never end when the trees suddenly receded, and the drive brought them to an open space covered with gravel and surrounded by carefully tended rose beds. A gray station wagon stood on the gravel in front of the house that was bigger than the school Maggie had been attending for the last year. She tried to count the windows, but soon gave up. It was a very beautiful house, but it looked just as uninviting as the iron gate. Perhaps it was only the evening twilight that made the ochre yellow of the plaster look so dirty. Perhaps the green shutters were closed only because night was already falling over the surrounding mountains. Perhaps, but Maggie would have bet her last book that they were seldom open, even in the daytime. The wooden door looked as forbiddingly as a tight closed mouth, and Maggie involuntarily reached for Mo's hand as they approached it. Dustfinger followed warily, with his battered backpack over his shoulder. Gwen was probably still asleep inside it when Mo and Maggie went up to the door. He kept a couple steps behind them, looking uneasily at the closed shutters as if he suspected that the mistress of this house was watching them from one of the windows. There was a small barred window beside the front door, the only one not hidden behind green shutters. Below it was another notice. "If you intend to waste my time on trivia, you better go away. Now." Maggie cast Mo an anxious glance, but he only made an encouraging face at her and pressed the bell. Maggie heard it ringing inside the big house, but nothing happened for quite a while. A magpie fluttered out of one of the rhododendron bushes growing near the house, and a couple of fat sparrows pecked busily at invisible insects in the gravel. But that was all. Maggie was just throwing them some breadcrumbs she'd found in her jacket pocket, left over from a picnic on some long-forgotten day, when the door suddenly opened. The door, or the woman who came out of it, was older than Mo, quite a lot older, though Maggie could never be sure how old grown-ups were. Her face reminded Maggie of a bulldog, but perhaps that was her ferocious expression than its features. She wore a mouse gray sweater and an ash gray skirt with a pearl necklace around her short neck and felt slippers on her feet. The kind of slippers Maggie had once had to wear when she and Mo visited a historic castle. Eleanor's hair was gray too. She had it pinned up, but the strands were hanging down everywhere as she'd done it impatiently and in a hurry. She didn't look as if she spent much time in front of a mirror. "Good heavens, Mortimer, what a surprise!" she asked, without wasting time on further greetings. "Where did you spring from?" Her voice sounded brusque, but her face could entirely hide the fact that she was pleased to see Mo. "Hello, Eleanor," said Mo, putting his hand on Maggie's shoulder. "Do you remember Maggie? As you can see, she's grown up quite a bit now." Eleanor cast Maggie a brief, irritated glance. "Yes, so I see," she said. "It's only natural for children to grow, wouldn't you say? As far as I remember, it's been some years since I last set eaves on you or your daughter. So, to what do I owe the unexpected honor of your visit today? Are you finally going to take pity on my poor books?" "That's right," Mo nodded. "One of my library commissions has been postponed. You know how libraries are always short on money." Maggie looked at him uneasily. She hadn't realized he could lie quite so convincingly. "Because it was so sudden," Mo continued, "I couldn't find anywhere for Maggie to go, so I brought her with me. I know you don't like children, but Maggie won't leave jam on your books or tear out pages to wrap up dead frogs." Eleanor muttered something suspicious and scrutinized Maggie, as if she thought her capable of any kind of disgraceful conduct, whatever her father might say. "When you brought her here, we could at least put her in a playpen," she remarked coldly. "I don't suppose that would do now." Once again, she looked Maggie up and down as she were being asked to admit a dangerous animal to her house. Maggie felt her anger make the blood rise to her face. She wanted to go home, get back in the camper van and go somewhere else. Anywhere, so long as she didn't have to stay with this horrible woman whose cold pebble eyes were boring holes into her face. Eleanor's gaze moved from Maggie to Dustfinger, who was standing still in the background looking awkward. And who's this? She looked inquiringly at Mo. Do I know him? This is Dustfinger, a friend of mine. Perhaps only Maggie noticed Mo's hesitation. He wants to go on south, but maybe you could put him up for a night in one of your many rooms. Eleanor folded her arms. Only on the condition that his name has nothing to do with the way he treats books, she said. And he'll have to put up with rather Spartan accommodations in the attic because my library has grown a great deal over the last few years. Nearly all of my guest rooms are full of books. How many books do you have? Asked Maggie. She'd grown up amongst pile of books, but even she couldn't imagine there were books behind all the windows of this huge house. Eleanor expected her again, this time with unconcealed contempt. How many? She repeated. Do you think I count them like buttons or peas? A great very many. There are probably more books in every single room of this house than you will ever read, and some of them are so valuable that I wouldn't hesitate to shoot you if you dared to touch them. But because you are a clever girl, or so your father assures me, you wouldn't do that anyway, would you? Maggie didn't reply. Instead, she imagined standing on tiptoe and spitting 3 times into this old witch's face. However, Mo just laughed. You haven't changed, Eleanor, he remarked. A tongue is sharp as a paper knife, but I warn you, if you harm Maggie, I'll do the same to your beloved books. Eleanor's lips curled into a tiny smile. Well said, she answered, stepping aside. You obviously haven't changed either. Come in. I'll show you the books that need your help, and a few others as well. Maggie had always thought Mo had a lot of books. She never thought so again. Not after setting foot in Eleanor's house. There were no haphazard piles laying around as they did at home. Every book obviously had a place, but where other people have wallpaper, pictures, or just an empty wall, Eleanor had bookshelves. The shelves were white and went right up to the ceiling in the entrance hall, though which she had first led them, but in the next room and the corridor beyond it, shelves were black as the tiles on the floor. These books, announced Eleanor with a dismissive gesture as they passed, the closely ranked spines, I have accumulated over the years. They're not particularly valuable, mostly of mediocre quality, nothing out of the ordinary. Should certain fingers be unable to control themselves and take them off the shelf now and again, she added, casting a brief glance at Maggie, I don't suppose the consequences would be too serious. Just so long as once those fingers have satisfied their curiosity, they put every book back in its proper place again and don't leave any unappetizing bookmarks inside. Here Eleanor turned to Mo. Believe it or not, she said, I actually found a dried up slice of salami used as a bookmark in one of these books last night. A wonderful 19th century first edition. Maggie couldn't help giggling, which naturally earned her another stern look. It's nothing to laugh about, young lady, said Eleanor. Some of the most wonderful books ever printed were lost because some fool of a fishmonger tore out their pages to wrap his stinking fish in. In the Middle Ages, thousands of books were destroyed when people cut up their bindings to make soles for shoes or to heat steam baths with their paper. The thought of such incredible abominations, even if they had occurred centuries ago, made Eleanor gasp for air. Well, let's forget about that, she said, or I shall get overexcited. My blood pressure is much too high as it is. She had stopped in front of a door that had an anchor with a dolphin coiled around it, painted on the white wood. This is a famous painter's special sign, explained Eleanor, stroking the dolphin's pointed nose with one finger. Just the thing for a library door, eh? I know, said Maggie. Aldous Manitas. He lived in Venice and printed books the right size to fit into his customers' saddlebags. Really? Eleanor wrinkled her brow, intrigued. I didn't know that. In any case, I am the fortunate owner of a book he printed with his own hands in the year 1503. You mean it's from his workshop? Maggie corrected her. Of course, that's what I mean. Eleanor cleared her throat and gave Mo a reproachful glance, as if it could be only his fault that his daughter was precocious enough to know such things. Then she put her hand on the door handle. No, child, she said, as she pressed the handle down with almost solemn reverence. has ever before passed through this door, but I assume your father has taught you a certain respect for books. I'll make an exception today. However, only on the condition that you keep at least 3 paces away from the shelves. Is that agreed? For a moment, Maggie felt like saying no. It wasn't. She would have loved to surprise Eleanor by showing her contempt for her precious books, but she couldn't do it. Her curiosity was too much for her. She felt almost as if she could hear the books whispering on the other side of the half-open door. They were promising her 1,000 unknown stories, 1,000 doors into worlds she had never seen before. The temptation was stronger than Maggie's pride. Agreed, she murmured, clasping her hands behind her back. 3 paces. Her fingers were itching with desire. Sensible child, said Eleanor, so condescendingly that Maggie almost went back on her decision. But they entered Eleanor's holy of holies. You've had the place renovated, Maggie heard Mo say. He added something else, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was just staring at the books. The shelves on which they stood smelled of freshly sawn wood. They went all the way up to a sky-blue ceiling with tiny lights in there, hanging like stars. Narrow wooden stepladders on casters stood by the shelves, ready to help any reader up to the top shelves. There were reading desks with books lying open on them, held in place by brass chains that shone like gold. There were empty glass display cases containing books with pages stained by age, but showing the most wonderful pictures. Maggie couldn't resist moving closer. One step forward, a quick glance at Eleanor, who luckily had her back turned, and she was right beside the display case. She bent lower and lower into the glass until her nose was touching it. Prickly leaves twined around pale brown letters. A tiny red dragon's head was spitting out flowers over the stained paper. Riders on white horses looked at Maggie as if scarcely a day had passed since someone had painted them with tiny marten hair brushes. A man and a woman stood beside them, perhaps a bridal couple. A man with a bright red hat was looking angrily at them. You call that 3 paces? Maggie spun around in alarm, but Eleanor didn't seem too angry. Ah, yes, the art of illumination, she said. Once only rich people could read, so the pictures painted around the letters were to help the poor understand the stories. Of course, no one planned to give them pleasure. The poor were put into the world to work, not to have a nice time or to look at pretty pictures. That kind of thing was only for the rich. No, the idea was to instruct the poor, till the stories came from the Bible. Everyone knew them anyway. The books were put in churches, and a page was turned every day to show a new picture. What about this book? Asked Maggie. I don't think this one was ever in a church, replied Eleanor. Most likely it was made for a very rich man to enjoy. It's almost 600 years old. There was no missing the pride in her voice. People have committed murder for such a book. Luckily, I only had to buy it. As she spoke these last words, she turned abruptly and looked at Dustfinger, who had followed them into the library, soundless as a prowling cat. For a moment, Maggie thought Eleanor would send him back to the corridor, but Dustfinger stood in front of the shelves, looking impressed, with his hands behind his back. That he gave her no reason to turn him out, so she just cast him a final distrustful glance and turned back to Mo. He was standing there with one of his reading desks and a book in his hand, its spine hung only by a couple of threads. He held it carefully, with a bird like a bird with a broken wing. Well, asked Eleanor anxiously, can you save it? I know it's in terrible shape. I'm afraid the others aren't in much of a better way, but that can all be fixed. Mo put down the book and inspected another. But I think it'll take me at least 2 weeks, if I don't have to get a hold of any more materials, which could mean more time. Will you put us up for that long? Of course, Eleanor nodded, but Maggie noticed the glance she cast at Dustfinger. He was still standing behind the shelves near the door, and seemed entirely absorbed in looking at the books, but Maggie sensed he had missed none of what was said behind his back. There were no books in Eleanor's kitchen, not one, but they ate an excellent supper there at a wooden table that came so Eleanor assured them, from a scriptorium of an Italian monastery. Maggie doubted it. As far as she knew, the monks had worked at desks with sloping tops in the scriptoria of their monasteries, but she kept this information to herself. Instead, she took another slice of bread and was just wondering how nice the cheese, standing on the supposed scriptorium table, would be when she noticed Mo whispering something to Eleanor. Since Eleanor's eyes widened greedily, Maggie concluded that they could only be discussing a book, and she immediately thought of brown paper, a pale green linen binding, and the anger in Mo's voice. Beside her, Dustfinger superstitiously slipped a slice of ham into his backpack for Gwen's supper. Maggie saw a round nose emerge from the pack, snuffling in hope of more delicacies. Dustfinger smiled at Maggie when he noticed her looking at him and gave Gwen some more ham. He didn't seem to find anything odd about Mo and Eleanor's whispering, but Maggie was sure the two of them were planning something secret. After a short time, Mo rose from the table and went out. Maggie asked Eleanor where the bathroom was, and followed him. It was a strange feeling to be spying on Mo. She couldn't remember ever doing it before, except the night before, when Dustfinger had arrived, and the time she had tried to find out whether Mo was Santa Claus. She was ashamed of stealing after him like this, but it was his own fault. Why was he hiding the book from her? Now, it seemed he might be going to give it to Eleanor. A book Maggie wasn't allowed to see. Ever since Mo had hurriedly hidden it behind his back, Maggie had been able to get it out of her head. She even looked for it in Mo's bag before he loaded his things into the van, but she couldn't find it. She just had to see it before it disappeared. Maybe into one of Eleanor's display cases. She had to know why it meant so much to Mo. For its sake, he would drag her all the way here. He looked around once more in the entrance hall before leaving the house, but Maggie ducked behind a chest just in time. The smell of mothballs and lavender. She decided to stay in hiding until Mo came back. He'd be sure to see her if she went outdoors. Pardon me. Time passed painfully slowly, as it always does when you're waiting for something with your heart thumping hard. The books in the white bookcases seemed to be watching Maggie, but they said nothing to her, as if they sensed there was only one book Maggie could think about just now. Finally, Mo came back, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. Perhaps he's just going to hide it here, thought Maggie. Where could you hide a book better than among 10,000 others? Yes, Mo is going to leave it here, and they drive home again. But I would like to see it, thought Maggie. Just once, for it's put on one of those shelves I'm supposed to stay 3 paces away from. Mo passed her so closely that she could have touched him, but he didn't notice her. Maggie, don't look at me like that, he sometimes told her. You're reading my thoughts again. Now he looked anxious, as if he wasn't quite sure he was doing the right thing. Maggie counted slowly to 3 before following her father, but a couple times Mo stopped so suddenly that Maggie almost ran into him. He didn't return to the kitchen, but went straight to the library. Without looking back, he opened the door with a Venetian's painter's mark on it and closed it quietly behind him. So there. So there stood Maggie, amongst all the silent books, wondering whether to follow him and ask her to show her the book. Would he be very angry? She was just about to summon up all of her courage and go after him when she heard footsteps. Rapid, firm footsteps, quick and impatient. That could only be Eleanor. Now what? Maggie opened the nearest door and slipped through it. A 4-poster bed, a dresser, silver-framed photographs, and a pile of books on the bedside table. A catalog lying open on the rug, its pages full of pictures of old books. She was in Eleanor's bedroom. Heart thudding, she listened for noises outside. She could hear Eleanor's energetic footsteps, and then the sound of the library door closing a second time. Cautiously, she slipped out into the corridor again. She was standing outside the library, undecided, when she felt a hand suddenly laid on her shoulder from behind. Another hand stifled her cry of alarm. Only me, breathed Dustfinger into her ear. Keep quiet or we're both in trouble, understand? Maggie nodded, and Dustfinger slowly took his hand away from her mouth. Your father's gonna give the old witch that book, right? He whispered. Has he taken it out of the van? Tell me, did he have it with him? Didn't he? Maggie pushed him away. I don't know, she snapped. What business is it of yours? What business is it of mine? Dustfinger laughed quietly. Perhaps I'll tell you sometime. But just now, all I want to know is whether you've seen it. Maggie shook her head. She didn't know why she was lying to Dustfinger. Perhaps because he had pressed his hand over her mouth a little too hard. Maggie, listen to me. Dustfinger looked at her intently. His scars were like pale lines that someone had drawn on his cheeks. 2 slightly curved marks on his left cheek, and a third, longer line on his right cheek, running from ear to nostril. Capricorn will kill your father if he doesn't get that book, hissed Dustfinger. Kill him, do you understand? And I tell you what he's like. He wants the book, and he always gets what he wants. It's ridiculous to believe it will be safe from him here. Mo doesn't think so. Dustfinger straightened up and stared at the library door. Yes, I know, he murmured. That's the trouble. And so, he said, putting both hands on Maggie's shoulder and propelling her towards the closed door, So now you're going to go in there, the picture of innocence, and find out what the pair of them are planning to do with that book, okay? Maggie was about to protest, but before she knew it, Dustfinger had opened the door and pushed her into the library. And I believe that's where we shall leave off for tonight. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us this evening. I have been Kinitsuki, and this has been Kinitsuki's Storytime. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Good night.